Greetings and welcome to a new narration by DrTorment. The following story may prove a little sensitive to certain viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised, and consider this your one and only warning. Now, with that out of the way, let us proceed. As to avoid any kind of confusion or misconception, please note that the following story is told from a female perspective. Now, onward with the story. It was Halloween, and all the children were outside dressed up and knocking excitedly on doors in hope of scoring some candy. Their parents were walking alongside them and keeping an eye out for them, in case something bad happened. There were all sorts of urban legends going around, even from when I was a kid. Stories of strange men kidnapping children when they knocked on their door, or the candy being laced with drugs or razor blades. Everyone had heard of these things, but no one actually knew anyone who had experienced them. Personally, I think it was just some government lies spread to make parents accompany their kids just so they wouldn't be able to play tricks such as egging houses or TPing their neighbors' yards. I was sitting at home with the curtains drawn and the porch lights turned off. I had no time or energy for some greedy rascals to knock on my door and ask for candy. I'd gotten myself a big bowl of discounted Halloween candy from the local supermarket, and there was already a big pile of wrappers forming on the ground beneath my feet. My favorite candy was Kit Kat. I loved pulling apart each finger and taking small bites to really savor the candy bar. Some people preferred taking a big bite out of all 4 of the fingers without breaking them apart first. I thought those were no better than animals. My mother had always been very strict with manners and etiquette, and she nitpicked even the smallest things, such as, of course, how I ate candy. I had to take small bites and eat with class, otherwise I was no better than the homeless people on the street. During the evening, kids still came and knocked on my door and rang the doorbell. I wanted to open the door and scream at them. But I knew if I did that, the jig was up, and they would know I was at home. Those little rascals do have their own little network of information after all. I wanted a calm evening where I could watch the latest episode of my favorite soap opera. I had positioned myself on the couch with my feet on the table in front of me and a bowl of candy on my lap. I thought that if my mother had seen me right now, she would have had another heart attack and died again. But thank God that old hag was dead and I could do whatever I pleased. Just as I reached for the remote to increase the volume, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. I tried to ignore it, but it kept getting worse. I put aside the bowl and stood up to get myself a glass of water from the kitchen. Suddenly, something splashed beneath me on the floor. "Bloody hell," I yelled. This can't be happening, not right now, but I knew it was time. I put my shoes and jacket on and grabbed my keys and started heading to my car. The pain was intensifying, and I was wondering if I was even in any condition to drive. But still, I buckled myself in and put the gear into reverse and started driving. The night was cold and chilly, and it was thundering. I could barely see the road ahead since it was foggy too. Maybe if I was lucky, I would get hit by another car so I wouldn't make it to the hospital and escape all those bills I knew were going to pile up afterwards. But it seems luck was not on my side today, since I made it to the hospital and even found a parking spot right outside, which was highly unusual. Usually you would have to park all the way in the back and walk a good 5 minutes. Yes, well, tough luck if you were ill or injured. That's what I would think to myself every time I had to look for a spot. I walked in through the main entrance and made my way to the reception. Behind it was a young girl sitting on one of those spinning chairs with a pile of paperwork and signing away. I just stood in front of this girl, hoping for her to notice me. The pains kept getting worse, and I almost wanted to kneel over, but I just held it in. It fascinated me how a person could be so unaware of their surroundings. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, just staring at her. I remember how psychologists back in the days used to think that humans had a biological instinct of knowing when someone was observing them, even if that person was not in their eyesight. I guess this didn't apply to this girl, since 5 minutes had passed and she didn't even look up once. I could have kept this going for longer, but then yet another cramp hit me and I let out a wheeze of pain which finally caught her attention. She looked up at me like a deer in headlights and said, "Oh God, I'm sorry. Have you been standing here for long?" "5 minutes or so," I responded. "Oh dear, I'm very sorry. I didn't see you at all. What can I help you with?" "Oh, that's interesting," I thought. I was standing just right in front of her, and still she was so preoccupied with her work that she didn't notice me. What if I was a crazy gunman ready to shoot her? She really should start paying more attention to what goes on around her. "I am in labor," I responded. The look on her face got even more embarrassed. She was almost grimacing. "Holy damn, sorry, pardon my French. I'm just surprised you could stand here for 5 minutes without screaming. I'm going to call a nurse over right now. Please, have a seat in the wheelchair over there, and she will be here ASAP." The nurse rolled me over to the delivery room, and I laid in bed and the doctor checked how dilated I was. He said I wasn't dilated enough and I needed to wait some more before we could start pushing. Once every hour he came back to check, and it still wasn't enough. The hours kept going by, and eventually 20 hours had passed, and this bastard of a kid was still not ready to leave. Because of this pregnancy, I had lost half of the hair on my head, 2 teeth, and my once youthful and beautiful face was now bleak and riddled with acne. He had taken everything from me, and now he wanted to stay there for longer. Finally, the doctor came back, and he told me that if he stayed in there for longer, it would be a danger to my health. Huh, a danger to my health? I'd never heard that one before. Wouldn't it be a danger to the baby's health to stay in the womb too long? "We need to do a C-section immediately," he said. Wow. First he ruins my health and gives me a nightmarish pregnancy, and then he decides to go out on a bang by forcing the doctors to cut me up to deliver him. If his father hadn't left me already, I'm quite sure he probably would have now if he saw the state I was in. The doctors rolled me into the operating room and laid me on top of the table. They injected me with nerve killer so I wouldn't feel anything during the surgery. Although it worked as promised and I didn't experience any pain, I could still feel everything they were doing. I could hear the sound of the scalpel cutting into my flesh and their hands gouging into the hole they had just created. I could feel their hands prodding inside and pushing my organs in different directions so they could deliver the baby. I finally knew what those alien abduction lunatics on TV were talking about. I felt like I had been abducted by aliens and being vivisected for their enjoyment. I barely felt human anymore. I felt like an animal in a slaughterhouse. They might as well just tear my heart out while they're at it, since I felt dead already, like I had just died and went to hell. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they pulled him out. I was listening for the sound of cries, but the room was dead silent. There were at least 10 hospital staff standing around me, and they also were quiet. They just looked at each other nervously. The doctor quickly pulled him away from my line of sight and started working on him. I had no idea what he was doing, but one of the nurses came over and started stroking my head, told me not to worry and that everything was going to be okay. But what she didn't realize was that it wasn't in fact that he wasn't breathing that worried me. The doctor just stood there, dumbfounded, and had stopped working on the baby. He called over another doctor, and they started whispering to each other intensely. The possibilities of what they were whispering about were running through my head. He must have been born with horns, why else would they be so panicked? After a while, the doctor picked up the baby and walked over to me. "Ma'am, in my 20 years of experience being an OBGYN, I have yet to witness a baby not to cry when they are born." I looked at him, and I was trying to wrap my head around what he just said. "It shouldn't be medically possible," he continued. "A baby must cry when they are born, because that's how they start breathing, but your son is perfectly healthy, and breathing even though he hasn't made a single sound since we delivered him." When I was back in my hospital bed, my son was cradled in my arms. The nurse had put him there, and I hadn't put him down. I was just staring at him. I knew the doctor had told me he was physically healthy, but there was still a part of me that felt that there was something wrong with him. Something mentally disturbed. What kind of baby causes their mother all this harm and then doesn't even cry when he is born? Like he's happy that he didn't have to endure any of the pain. He even got to take the easy way out and didn't have to fight his way out of me. On top of that, he was born on Halloween, the day where you celebrate all things demonic. I stayed up with him all night, just staring. Not once did he cry. I tried shaking him a little and even pinched him, but he just looked right back at me with a blank stare. The nurse came over and tried helping me to nurse him. I held him to my nipple and tried feeding him, but instead I screamed in pain. I pulled him away, and I saw my nipple was bleeding. The nurse looked back at me in shock and grabbed him from me. This twat was even born with teeth. "I guess he's a biter, huh?" she giggled. I wanted to slap that smile off her stupid face. One night, on his 13th birthday, he and I were watching TV. Every time we watched a movie together, it was a slasher, because that's the only type of movies he enjoyed. I had asked him once why he enjoyed seeing people get brutally murdered and the gore that followed. I don't know. There's just something so satisfying about the way the blade sounds when it cuts through the flesh. I wonder how it would sound for real. The movies just use sound effects, so it doesn't really give a good representation of the real deal. The answer he gave me was even more horrifying than what was happening on the screen. "So, you want to try it for yourself, to see what it would sound like then?" I responded. "I don't think so. The cleanup would be too much of a hassle." I just turned my head back to the screen and tried to forget the disturbing things he just said, but that was easier said than done. That night, I laid in bed on my side and turned towards the window. It was a full moon, and the silver light shined into my bedroom and illuminated the whole room. Besides me, on the bedside table, was a picture of my son, smiling. I remember taking that picture on the last day of school. I had forced him to smile for the camera. You see, he never ever smiled at me. In his 11 years on this earth, and I had yet to see even a corner of his mouth lift. He also had never cried or gotten angry. He was always deadpan like a robot or a zombie. I thought back to my C-section. I remember when I felt like I was being vivisected by aliens. What if it wasn't just a thought? What if it was a memory? Perhaps they put something into me before they closed me up, something non-human, an alien fetus that looked like a human being. That was the only thing that could explain why he was the way that he was. I had been to countless psychologists, child behavior analysts, and doctors, but no one could find anything wrong with him. They always asked to speak with the child alone, and once they were back, they always gushed out about how well-behaved and intelligent he was. They told me I should appreciate my son, since most of the mothers they saw coming in here dreamed of having a child like mine. They refused to listen when I told them that I believed that my son was going to become a dangerous man, a future school shooter, serial killer, or something. But they always shut me down by telling me that he displayed none of the characteristics of those people. I told them about how I had read his diary and how he wrote that he fantasized different ways to kill people and how that would make him feel. He wrote about what weapons he would use and how he would go about doing it. The psychologist simply said that it was normal for children this age to have an active imagination, and that it was healthy for him to journal his thoughts and feelings. I never told my son what all those meetings with the professionals were for, and he never asked. But I could tell that he knew exactly what they were for. I could tell by the way he looked at me. At age 18, he brought home a girl. He had had girlfriends previously, and this one, just like the girls before, had the exact same features. They all had brown hair and green eyes and the same general facial features. This disturbed me because they all resembled me. They looked just like me when I was their age. I know that he knew this because I would often catch him sitting in the living room looking through old picture books of me in my teens. Every time he brought home a new girl, he would observe my reaction. He would look at my facial expression and body language for any type of clue that I was uncomfortable. But I knew what he was doing, and I refused to give him the satisfaction. Usually, they break up within a few months. When I asked him why he would break up with them, he will always reply that he got bored of them. He was just like his piece of crap father, even though he had never met him. However, with this newest girlfriend, he never got the chance of breaking up with her. One day, I was out on my daily walk, and my next-door neighbor hurried over to me from my yard, starting to give me condolences. I looked at her confused because I had no idea what she was referring to. "Your son's girlfriend, haven't you heard?" "Well, what about his girlfriend?" I asked. "She killed herself last night. I thought he would have told you." My whole body filled with rage, and I excused myself, running back home. I walked towards his bedroom with rage almost pouring out of me, and the thumps of my steps echoed in the house. "What the hell is wrong with you? Your girlfriend kills herself, and you don't tell your own mother. You've been at home all day, you haven't even mentioned it." He just looked at me with that same deadpan expression he always had. "I guess it's shock or whatever," he responded casually. I left his room and picked up the phone, calling her parents. We talked for a long time, and they told me that she had hung herself in their garage. She had left no suicide note, and they had no idea whatsoever that she was depressed. After I hung up, I just sat there. I recalled seeing a piece of rope in my son's room a couple of weeks ago, but today, it was no longer there. I knew for a fact that he killed her. I drove over to the police station and told them everything, from how he enjoyed watching slasher movies to the diary and finally to the rope. Tears were forming in my eyes, and I hoped and prayed that they would believe me. But guess what? They didn't. They said that none of this was concrete evidence and that they had already investigated her death, finding no foul play. "And what about the diary and the rope?" I yelled. "Oh, that's all circumstantial," he responded. From then on, I knew that no matter who I told, no one would believe me. My son was a straight-A student and an athlete at school. Right now, everyone felt sorry for him and were giving him heaps of condolences he didn't even deserve. I hated him. I truly did. There was not a single day that went by where I didn't wish I had just aborted him or killed him as an infant when I had that chance. What was most gut-wrenching was the fact that I was the only one who knew what kind of demon he truly was, and that he was the one that killed her. I just had to prove it to them. A month after the quote-unquote suicide of my son's girlfriend, he was back to normal. He was tired of the charade and decided to attend a party that had been thrown at his friend's house. Once he had left, I decided that this was my chance to prove to everyone what he was. I took my car and parked it a few houses away from where the party was thrown. I sat there for hours just observing and waiting for my opportunity to strike. I could see a girl stumbling out through the doors and started walking towards my direction. She was visibly inebriated. Once she reached my car, I cranked down the window and asked if she wanted a lift, which she accepted. She got into the passenger side of the car and I started driving. She was so intoxicated that she passed out immediately. I kept driving and eventually I stopped the car. I then got out and walked towards the trunk of my car, pulling out a pair of gloves and putting them on my hands. Then I pulled my hair into a tight bun and made my way over to the passenger side of the car, opening the door. I dragged her out of the car and started making my way into the forest where I had parked. I made sure not to go too far in, since I wanted her to be found relatively quick. I placed her on the damp leaves on the ground and pulled out a knife from my back pocket. This knife belonged to my son, and he had bought it online at an auction after seeing Pulp Fiction. He was dead set on getting this specific knife since it was a replica of the one they used in the movie. I looked at the girl and thought that she was perfect. Brunette with green eyes, just how he liked them. A part of me felt bad about what I was about to do, but I kept reminding myself that this was for the greater good. She was in fact a hero, because she was giving her life to save the numerous other women who could face the same demise at the hands of my son. I think she would understand somehow and be grateful to be remembered as a hero. With the knife in hand, I plunged it into her chest. The sound it made was ear-grating, but I knew I had to keep going. I wanted to make it as quick and painless as possible for her. She let out a loud moan, but she was so out of it that she didn't even try to defend herself. Thank God the syringe I injected into her in the car worked. I kept plunging the knife into her over and over again, and the blood splattered all over me. Finally, when I was done, I left the knife in her chest and retrieved a piece of tape from my pocket. On it, I had my son's fingerprints. I had placed these tapes on his door handle, you see, because, let's be honest, that is a thing you touch almost on a daily basis, and so does he. I placed the tape strategically on the knife handle so that his fingerprints would be easily identifiable. I got back to my car and opened up the trunk again. I picked up the bottle of bleach and started scrubbing down the whole passenger side so that no one would be able to find any trace of her in the car. When I was done, I looked back at her body one last time and I felt proud of my masterpiece. I knew I had done something good tonight, even if it meant that she had to be sacrificed for it. But what was one life in comparison to the countless other possible ones? I knew I had no other choice but to do this. I had tried talking, reasoning, and convincing other people, but nobody listened. They made me do this. They wanted this. This is the result of their inaction. That night was the best night's sleep I had ever gotten. The feeling of finally accomplishing something and soon hopefully being rid of my psychopath son was so liberating. The only unbearable part was having to wait for him to get caught. But when I finally heard those bangs on the door, followed by the words, "Police, open up!" it was unlike any feeling I had ever felt before. It was pure bliss, euphoria. The fact I had finally found the body and connected it to my son felt like 1,000 orgasms at once. When they hauled him away in handcuffs, he looked at me, but this time, not with that same deadpan expression he always had. No, this time it was anger, disgust, and horror all at once. Seeing all those feelings splattered on his face gave me immense joy. When nobody was looking at me, I gave him a satisfied smirk. I finally won. I finally won this little cat and mouse we were playing, and I had finally beaten him. He had finally got caught in the mousetrap, and I just stood there in the doorway, letting out a sigh of relief. It felt like the world had been lifted off my shoulders, and I was finally free for the first time in my life. I had been a prisoner for 18 excruciating years, and it was finally time for him to feel what I had felt all this time. And so we've come to the end of our narration today. If you enjoyed this particular story, please consider giving it a thumbs up and comment your thoughts down below. Maybe even subscribe, as that will help out the channel immensely. I'll also invite you to check out the links in the description below, which leads to the story and its creator. Lastly, for those who are willing, consider having a look at our Patreon page in the link below and in the video, and consider aiding the channel in its grand goal to remove the ads from our videos so we can provide you with uninterrupted stories. This has been your host, DrTorment, bidding you adieu. And remember, don't fall asleep ever.